So the Freedom and Rights Coalition, far-right populism in Aotearoa. And I want to start just by giving a brief glossary of terms, because it's, I think, useful if we all understand what we're saying when we talk about the far right or about fascism or what have you. So I use the term far right to describe groups and individuals whose beliefs place them on the far right of the political spectrum relative to the centre. So it's not an ideology, it's just a relative term as to where they are. There are many beliefs that we today consider far right, which were once the dominant beliefs of the people who rule in society. So we can talk about white supremacy as a fringe belief, but for much of the 20th century, New Zealand had an official white New Zealand policy. So that's one example of that. But far right is not synonymous with white supremacy. I would say that the groups that I call far right are groups that believe that a certain group, and that may be a racial group or it may be a religious group, or it may be some other identity, they believe that that group is inherently superior to others or has some inherent right to rule over others. So there are other examples other than white supremacy, although that is a very dominant strand of the far right in white settler countries, such as New Zealand. Populism is a political strategy for appealing to a large section of the population. So again, it's not an ideology, but more a strategy. So the left, the right, and even the centre can all use this strategy. And the other term that I want to define here is Christian nationalism, because I think this is the best descriptor for a group like Destiny Church or their front group, the Freedom and Rights Coalition. This is the belief that the nation is defined by Christianity and Christianity should be privileged above other religions. And I'll come to some examples of seeing that from Freedom and Rights Coalition. A couple of other terms that I don't use often in general conversation, but at an event like this, it could be useful to bring up, just to have a think about how we talk about some of these groups. And those are terms neo-fascism and post-fascism, which I've borrowed from the historian Enzo Traverso in his 2019 book, The New Faces of Fascism, Populism and the Far Right. So neo-fascism, he defines as having continuity with 20th century fascism. That, of course, is Mussolini's fascism in Italy, Franco in Spain, or Nazism in Germany. So neo-fascism is groups who, following the defeat of fascism in the Second World War, wanted to revive those ideologies and continue them. Post-fascism is what Traverso uses to describe new far-right movements that lack a connection with 20th century fascism. So they're not necessarily ideologically fascist in that they're not, reading Mein Kampf and things and basing their ideology on that. But if you're a historian, and I think this is also true if you are an anti-fascist activist, 20th century fascism provides the best point of comparison to understand these new far-right movements. So when we talk about anti-fascism, some people will quibble, well, are these groups fascist? And they don't have to be, adorning themselves with swastikas and making Nazi salutes for anti-fascists to be opposing them and analysing them and talking about them the way we are tonight. So I've got a couple of video clips in here as well. So I'll start with this one from 2003.
Are you able to turn that up, Byron?
I may be able to turn it up a little here. Is it just coming through the microphone or is it playing with the screen sharing?
Not 100% sure.
Okay, I'll just up the volume in Zoom and see if that makes a difference there. No. Okay, we might have to not use the video clips in that case, but this is it's just a 1 minute video of Brian Tamaki with Hannah Tamaki next to him, predicting that within the next 5 years they will be ruling the country. Obviously didn't come to pass. That was 2003, but he elaborates to say that he believes that Christians have a right to be ruling the country. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but that to put God in his rightful place as head of the nation, there should be a Christian leadership, such as himself. So, a bit of history of Destiny Church in the political sphere. They were founded as a Pentecostal church in 1998, and the first major political activity they were involved in was opposing civil unions in 2004. So if you're a bit younger, civil unions were a sort of alternative to marriage that was introduced for non-heterosexual couples, despite the opposition of, in particular, Destiny Church, who organised rallies at Parliament and elsewhere opposing this legislation. The following year, they contested the election with the Destiny New Zealand Party and received 0.6% of the vote, about 14,000 votes. They also contested the 2020 election with a front group called Vision New Zealand and Hannah Tamaki as leader. They received 0.1% of the vote, about 4,000 votes, and I'd say the reason for so many less in 2020 than 2005 isn't necessarily that they and their ideas are less popular, but just that there was more competition in this space. There was another party called One, which was an overtly Christian nationalist party, and there were the New Conservatives, and there were Billy Tikahika's organisation. Billy Tikahika himself, a Christian pastor, although not as explicitly Christian in his politics as some of these other groups. So don't let the small percentages make you think that they're not growing in their influence over the past few years. I want to talk about their Islamophobia. So after the mosque shootings in Aotearoa Christchurch in 2019, the Adhan, the Muslim call to prayer, was played on RNZ. And at the time, Brian Tamaki tweeted, "This is offensive to all Christians. Our national identity is at stake." So again, you're seeing there the idea that New Zealand is an inherently Christian nation, and anything that acknowledges in the more multicultural nature of this country, and that we do have minority religious groups such as Muslims, was seen as an attack on Christianity. A month later, Destiny Church pastor Derek Tate led a rally opposite Masjid An-Nur, where one of the shootings took place, to, in his words, declare that Christchurch in New Zealand belongs to Jesus Christ, who is the one true God. Hannah Tamaki, as the leader of Vision New Zealand, called for a 97% cut to immigration numbers and suggested that rather than accepting refugees for resettlement, New Zealand should instead pay them not to come here. She also vowed to ban the construction of new mosques, temples, and other foreign buildings of worship. So again, you're seeing there this idea that Christianity has a right to be here and a right to rule, and other religious groups do not. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a time where Destiny Church and their front group, the Freedom and Rights Coalition, has really come to the fore. Fraser McDonald, who's an anthropologist at the University of Waikato, sees the Pentecostal response to the pandemic as being rooted in theology. So Pentecostals, more than any other Christian denomination, concern themselves with otherworldly power. So the COVID-19 virus is seen by Pentecostals as being some kind of demonic force, so demonized in a literal sense of the word. And the protection against this evil is the power of the Holy Spirit. And any earthly rules that impede a devout Pentecostal from having a life in the Spirit are considered suspect. So a government who are imposing lockdowns, vaccine mandates, gathering limits, particularly because that affected how many people could gather for a church service, they are seen as being literally evil and on the side of the devil. So there's a URL there that'll link you to his article in the conversation, which is well worth a read. Just leave that up for a moment in case anyone wants to make a note of that. And there's another video, I'll skip it because we probably don't have the audio there, but Brian Tamaki went so far as to talk about Jacinda Ardern as the Antichrist as a result of public health measures to protect us against COVID-19. And I titled this slide FaRC on the Streets, because while they haven't got much of a showing when it comes to elections, they do at street level politics. So they've drawn thousands of people to their protests in large cities, in particular recently in Tamaki Makaurau, and they were a sizable chunk of the people at the Parliament protests in February and March that turned violent. They quite possibly have actually voted for their political party last election. So what's happening next for the Freedom Oats Coalition? Well, this coming Tuesday, they'll be holding a protest and mock trials outside of Parliament, supposedly trying politicians for crimes against humanity, which has been a common trope on the far right, not just among FaRC. Supporters, including Derek Tate, who I mentioned earlier, are running for local office. Derek Tate's running for a city council seat here in Christchurch. And Brian Tamaki is trying to unite the disparate parties of the so-called freedom movement into an electoral vehicle for next year's general election. So there's other parties I mentioned earlier, like One and New Conservative, and the remnants of what was Advanced New Zealand, bringing those all together to a party that could potentially cross the 5% threshold for seats in Parliament. I'm sceptical as to how successful this will be because there are a lot of huge egos in this space. Brian Tamaki's is one of them, and there's also a lot of infighting, and there are genuine political differences. So while some of the more overtly white supremacist groups may agree with FaRC on issues of Islamophobia, they may have the same attitude towards Muslims. Few of them want to be in a party that's led by someone who is Maori, as the Tamakis are. So I think we're going to see a lot of rifts emerge, just as there are many rifts right now in the freedom movement, as they call themselves. So I'm skeptical as to whether that will happen, but we're definitely going to be seeing more of a showing from FaRC and from these related groups, particularly on Tuesday when they carry out this protest, throughout the local elections, through the election next year, and there's no doubt going to be more street level protests. So that's, I'll end my bit there. Like I said, tried to be concise, but there's likely questions, so I do hope to be able to answer any questions people have as well.
Kia ora, Byron, thank you very much. Someone has commented, if you would like to play the video, you could stop screen sharing and then start screen sharing again, but this time when the screen sharing, check the share audio box before.
Ah, okay.
So if you want to take a couple of minutes and play the videos, I think people would like to see
that could be good, because hearing Brian in his own words, you know, I think is a little more significant than hearing me paraphrase. So, oh yeah, I see. Sorry, I'd forgotten to click that share computer sound button there. So again, from 2003.
In the next 5 years, by the time we hit our 10th anniversary, and I don't say this lightly, but we will be ruling the nation. and the government shall be upon his shoulders. And then peace can come to this nation. But just let me tell you this quickly, as you ever see. And I'll explain a little bit more tonight. But I feel very strongly in my heart that the word of the Lord came to me very strong and stronger over this weekend. That this will actually be the first nation historically in the world to be under the governance of God.
We go. First nation to be under the governance of God. And as representative on earth, Brian Tamaki, of course. And then the other video clip here, where he...
That a government, surely they would have our best interests at heart. Surely they're working for my end and my happiness. They wouldn't crush my business, would they? They wouldn't take away my job, would they? They wouldn't be as cruel as to let us all suffer if we were not forced to take a jab or a medical procedure. Surely they wouldn't let me and my kids suffer and go in hunger and not have proper housing, not concentrating on poverty. Just forcing us all and bribing us all with all sorts of money and gimmicks and KFC to take this jab. What's this all about? Surely you wouldn't do it. Yeah, she did. That's the cruelty. That's a trait of the beast. That is also control. She's a control freak. He's the second characteristic of the beast. The third one, carnage. Murdered, killed. Carnage, just 2 on our work. What about the mental misery and the stress that's on people? People are just so anxious, they're frustrated. My biggest concern is that they've wrapped me up so bad. I'm censored to bits. I can't speak. You see, that's what I say. The Antichrist spirit hates the church, hates Christianity, and hates apostles.
You have it.
Great. Thanks very much, Byron.